Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, SJP Properties, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, Greenberg Traurig, Allied Partners. Additional funding is provided by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, Antares Investment Partners, Athena Group, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, CB Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Herbert J. Sims and Company, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Helmsley Spear, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Metal Products, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, Meriden Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Moynihan Organization, MUSS Development, PALIN Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Sheldrake Organization, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, Triangle Services, WITKOFF Group, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report, Real Estate Trends in the Tri-State Region. You know, sometimes there are titans, you know, there's a clash of these titans, and today I've brought these young, dynamic real estate titans who are involved in New York City real estate, who are going to give their opinions of what's going on, because many of them, probably all of them, have not really seen a decline in the market since they started. My guests today include Eric Brody, principal of the Brody Group, Jason Alderman, Vice President Hines, Will Silverman, Managing Director at Studley, and last but not least, he has a dual life. He's an associate at Eli Weiss, associate at Ackmanship Real Estate Services, and proprietor at Local 138, my favorite bar downtown. So, we were saying before the show, why did you get into real estate? You know, and you have a very interesting story. You said your grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Correct. They settled in Brighton Beach, and Grandpa had a takeout business.
Yep.
Tell me about that.
Yep, my grandparents were all Holocaust survivors. They came here in the 50s, and they didn't have much education based on the life experience they had in their adolescence and their early youth, and so they went into the takeout food and bakery business, respectively, and over the course of time started to purchase buildings on Brighton Beach Avenue. And so after school, my brother and I would sort of go work in the store and also listen to my grandfather talk about tenants and visit him with tenants and talk about lease renewals.
Do you remember Base 7?
Yeah,
that was one of my first jobs. My one day at Good Humor Ice Cream and Orange Drinks many years ago.
Well, so it was just always around, and speaking to my grandfather about his early deals and how much things had changed. And when it came time for me to choose a career, a lot of those experiences sort of stayed in my mind, and ended up going into real estate and working in housing, start off, and then housing finance, and then still staying today in financing real estate projects.
Mr. Silverman, a returnee, how do you get into this? I mean, I know, but you know, since we're talking about it.
Well, for me, it was interesting. I mean, neither of my parents was in the business. They're both in the jewelry industry. But my father had a lot of friends who were in the business, namely the ones that you know are Arnold Penner and Bill Wagner. And as a kid, these guys would come over and they would talk about real estate, and it sounded exciting, and it sounded like a place where, I guess you could say, where eccentricity would thrive. And that made it more attractive.
Damon Runyon, you know, the characters, would you call it that?
Exactly, exactly. It was a place where you know, eccentricity either was or it wasn't, but it certainly wasn't frowned upon. And my prior career was in investment banking, where it certainly was frowned upon. And so I felt like this was a more natural home.
And Jason, our friend who grew up in Northern California, how did the guy from Northern California, whose father is was a professor, a philosophy professor, get into the world of real estate? I mean, how do you even get east is the question.
East for school, and I think for me the desire to build things has always been pretty deeply founded, and so I think that a combination of my mother, who's a professor of art, and so I have an artistic side, initially drew me to architecture, and ultimately I think to development as a sort of more dynamic and interesting, multifaceted role.
But I mean, growing up in Northern California, or even before you went to Dartmouth, did you have any thoughts that you'd be in the real estate business?
Yeah, I think for me, it's pretty early on that I decided that I wanted to be in real estate development. And again, it's a combination of two things that have always been interesting and near to me, which is the ability to help build something tangible and help design that, through obviously overseeing our architects. So it was pretty early on that I had the itch, if you will.
Brody, I mean, you wanted to run gyms. I mean, two Brooklyn boys. I mean, three Brooklyn boys. You go to Madison. You go to University of Wisconsin in Madison. Probably you were rowing and enjoyed the Wisconsin games.
Of course.
When they lost to Michigan. And you.
We actually won my year, but.
Okay, and you graduate and you go into the gym business. I mean, that's real estate, but a different type of real estate.
Yeah, it led me into the real estate business, kind of circumvented in that really to have a successful gym, you should own the land. But I really attribute getting into real estate development three things. Father's an architect, realized if you want to get into real estate, don't be the architect. Second thing was a problem with conformity. I always had a problem people telling necessarily how you were supposed to get something done, and an authority issue. So if we were talking about characters before, you felt as if you were a character, you were a leader, and then an entrepreneur, and that was really how. And then with the architectural twist, and that's what I see real estate development.
How'd you go from running a gym, muscle man, to building buildings in Brooklyn?
They say necessity breeds greatness. So out of necessity, how to get out of the gym business, which is a story for another time.
Yeah, you got 30 seconds to do it. Come on.
There was a very large gentleman who owned the gym. And I was owed a certain amount of dollars. He didn't want to pay those dollars, so I was forced to leave the gym business. And what that did on one hand was my father was giving away equity portions on developments to project managers. So he said, come, take a look, learn, but I'm not going to pay you. So how are you going to survive? So I was leasing properties on the weekends, going to construction school 4 nights a week, while just basically shadowing my father as an architect. And I realized that the real dollars are in project management, and the step above project management is development.
Now, the real dollars is if you work for Heinz. I mean, Heinz is, Jerry Heinz is probably one of the most fantastic. I mean, this is the 800-pound gorilla, world-renowned, everything else, everything that Heinz touches is class. I mean, when they built buildings in New York City, the office buildings, when they got into anything. What have you seen with Heinz since you came? You were in Boston. You've been in New York for 3 years. What does Heinz look at in today's world in New York real estate? And how do they decipher the market, which is a much harder market than a number of years ago, which we'll discuss?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to mention about Heinz is that from the very beginning, I think the business has shifted. We now have a quite substantial acquisitions group who looks at a lot of core properties, value-add properties, here in the city and in the tri-state area.
To purchase acquisitions?
To purchase, yes.
Which at one time Heinz mostly developed.
Exactly. So that over the last 20 years or so has become a fairly core part of our business. I work less on that side and more on development, and so from the development perspective, I mean, we're active right now in 4 projects here in Manhattan. We're looking, we have...
Tell me the 4 projects.
610 Lexington, which is a development management assignment with our partner A.B. Rosen.
Small hotel, right?
Little one.
Shangri-La.
Little one. One project I hesitate to mention.
You can tell us about the 2 others.
Okay. 1 Jackson Square, which is down at the sort of the meeting of the Greenwich Village Meatpacking District and Southern Chelsea.
Which is what?
Which is a 40-unit condominium building. And the MoMA Tower, the museum, the parking lot, I should say, next to the Museum of Modern Art. So We have good conviction about the market over the medium term. We think, you know, there's obviously going to be a bit of a dip, but we think that quality sells, and we think that unique, very high-end, well-designed, well-executed projects will be successful.
No, look, the project at 610 Lexington happens to be mentioned in my article in The Sun, talking about new hotels, and that's a unique project. I mean, that's really a 6-star hotel which hasn't been in New York, and then you have 14 condominiums on top of it, which will probably be priced at whatever crazy price they are. And when you're selling 14 condominiums, they will be sold. Manhattan is a special place, right, as opposed to Brooklyn. Okay. What's happening in Atlantic Avenue? You think the economy is going to have an effect with, I mean, you know, you're in the outer boroughs. We do these shows, everybody tells me, Manhattan, Brooklyn. What's happening?
It certainly, I can only talk about my direct experience, and it certainly has slowed down over the last couple of weeks in the amount of offers and the quality of those offers. That's changing, so obviously that there's a tightening of people's ability to get mortgages. But that actually, in the short term, and the projects that are existing, is not, do I think, is a major issue. They will be absorbed, and the developers will go on to other projects. I think the more, you know, the stronger impact on the future is no one's moving forward with any development because of what's going on with the 421A and how it affects downtown Brooklyn and the waterfront specifically. You know, I can't talk about deeper into Brooklyn because some of those areas aren't in the geographic exclusion area. But if you see what's occurring now, the whole, you know, people needing to get foundations in the ground right now, which may affect, you know, the future of the density in downtown Brooklyn. That's where you see a lot of change. People aren't calling me off the hook, we need to put our building in the ground. If you're not moving forward with the project as of now, they're not moving forward. And I think that's where you're going to see a major impact is in 2009. I mean,
Will, 2007 was a great year for you and your team. And, you know, we were talking prior to the show and during our discussions, which we normally have periodically, you're saying you have a number of development deals. And there's a question, you know, the development deal where there's a 421A and there are other things. People are slower. What's happening? How do you see the sales activity this year?
I think that there are certain, couple of things. One is that there are certain deals that have to get done for reasons that operate outside of the market. So there are certain funds that are closing, and so they have to sell. There are certain developers that are wrapping up projects, and they've decided that they're going to exit by selling off pieces of those projects. So they're going to sell those things. So those deals have to get done, and I think they're going to get done at reasonably good numbers. What's behind us are, and we were joking about this before, what's behind us are the days of getting 45 or 50 offers on a $200 million building. That's probably behind us for a little while. But in terms of development sites in particular, there are a few sectors of the market that are still very strong. The sector in which Jason participates, which is the high-end luxury segment, I don't think we're seeing very significant slowdown. I mean, last year we sold Will Zeckendorf the 10 UN Plaza site overlooking the East River, and I think all indications there that he'll be very successful there, as he has been with his other very high-end residential developments.
Or shall we say you sold to Eastgate Properties?
Mm-hmm. Okay. But Will's the developer there. So I think that there are certain segments of the market that are still very strong. I think that commodity product is tough, and by commodity product I mean, you know, low-end or middle-tier, large 1, small 2-bedroom units on side streets for condominium development. I think those are a little bit tough. But I think that the projects that still have a strong location, I mean, as you said, it's still Manhattan. There's still structural demand. There's still foreign buyers.
But you know, let's get to the office buildings. You know, 2 weeks ago I did a show and I had Norman Sterner, and he was saying, I said, you know, how do you compare 2008 to 1990? And he says, everything is beautiful. I said, but Norman, you just bought a building for $1250 Broadway and you paid $410 a square foot. That building last year, Will, would have sold for $550 a foot.
It would have sold for a significantly stronger number.
Correct. So there is a decrease of, let's say, 15 to 20% in prices.
But can I pick up on the question that you gave Norman, which was what was different in 1990 versus in 2006 or in 2007? And while I was in, I think, junior high in 1990, there is one thing that I do remember, which is that life in the city was dramatically different then. I remember my friends and I would never go east of Avenue A, maybe Avenue B, and I certainly wouldn't tell my parents if I got home that I had been that far.
I wouldn't go to local 138.
Right. You wouldn't have thought about going to locations where local 138 are. But in general, the lifestyle in the city was so different, and so much of the economic strength that we've enjoyed in New York has been as a result of people coming here to enjoy that lifestyle. So long as that isn't imperiled, I think we're still looking at a market that in the long term moves like an upward sloping sine curve. And there will be some tough moments, but I think in general, so long as we maintain that, we're not going to have a early 90s style period.
You know, even for a gorilla like Heinz, there's more equity required. There's more of a need for the quality of the work that Eli is doing at Ackman Ziff, because there's more equity today. I mean, the joke, I remember doing a panel with Mike Tepedino of HFF a number of months ago, and he said, you know, I'm really working hard. I said, finally, it's about time you worked hard to arrange financing. And it is. You know, a good intermediary today is out there, because there aren't 50 offers. The same thing. When you're going for financing, what's happening today?
Well, obviously, you know, take what everybody's saying. Obviously, the rules have definitely changed since last year. It is what people say, it is a credit crunch. There's not endless money with problems that the CMBS market is experiencing. I mean, the CMBS market was a renewable source of liquidity.
I don't want to be Fox Business. You know, that's collateralized mortgage. You know, explain. You know, is the Wall Street guys putting out money?
Right, and that was a renewable source of energy. Whereas
we don't have it.
Right,
there's no CMBS market. There's 2 issues being done in the first quarter. So where are you getting money? Where even Heinz. I mean, that development at 610 Lexington. A.B. Rosen's putting more equity. If you build the building at the MoMA, guys are going to have to put equity. Where is that coming from?
Well, I think that, you know, over the last 5 to 10 years, as real estate as an asset class has become more acceptable, you've had more institutional equity available. So I think there's been certainly a shift, and there will continue to be a shift, from more debt to more equity. But I think the equity is there. It's a matter of finding it, obviously, and I think that, you know, it requires a little more creativity and a little bit longer search, but the equity is there, and I think that, you know, deals will continue to be done. I mean, we at the site adjacent to the museum, we've closed on our acquisition loan. So for us, I think it's a little bit further out, the need to find more equity. But we're having conversations, and we know that there's sources there.
Look, there is plenty of equity. Being in the opportunity fund business, there's equity. The question is, you know, when we have a Monday morning meeting and we sit down there, and you know, we look at a deal. We're looking at a deal, you know, a rental deal, or we look at a deal, and if I came into a deal and I said the word condominium, I would be flying from the 20th floor of the Time Warner Center, because I know that that's not the subject. If I call up my banks who I speak to on my seminars and I say condo, they'll say, you know what, maybe One Jackson will do, maybe we'll go into a unique property. If I say Atlantic Avenue, they're going to say, are you out of your mind?
Well, we acquired it really cheap, so they would probably say.
No, the point is they are. They're looking at the imputed value. They're saying if you acquired it cheap. But it's a tough time. You know, I take you, you know, you're a lawyer. You went to work for the city. That's where I met you at New York City Housing Development Corp. And then you go into the brokerage business. It's a tough business. I mean, you could have kept the nest, not making any money at New York City Housing Development, but you've become like him. You know, he makes money by whatever he kills. All of us over here make money on what we kill. I mean, isn't this a little scary at this time?
Well, sure. First of all, to be compared to Will, I appreciate it. Yeah, so thank you very much. But yeah, I definitely think it's very scary. But I think all of us are basically saying the same thing: is that for deals with real intrinsic value, a strong operator will unlock that value, and the capital markets will recognize that. I think gone are the days of the sort of deals that are all based on an Excel model and changing an if-sum formula, and there's the whole deal. A strong operator with a good project, with a good plan, there's still capital out for that. And speaking in the multifamily sector, yeah, condominium is a dirty, dirty word. It became a 5-letter, 4-letter word. Condo became a 4-letter word. But that being said, offsetting that is Fannie and Freddie are still in the market at unbelievably low rates because they have no, floors on their treasury, and that is a huge source of liquidity. So there are pockets of liquidity in this market for the right product, the right sponsor, and a sponsor who's willing to roll with the changes that unfortunately all of us are realizing right now.
How long is this going to last? You know, a number of months ago, I had a couple of economists on the show, and you know, not economists are the best hedges. You know, are we in a recession? I'm not sure we're in a recession. I'm not. I mean, you know, I don't know how long do you see? I mean, Studley is a great organization nationwide. Heinz is worldwide. You know, Brody's Brooklyn. You know, Acme. You know, how long do we? I mean, your father probably said, you know, you could have been an architect and you would make some money. How long do you? I mean, are you worried?
If you ask my father, he's scared and he's never doing a deal ever again, because he was around in the days when it was, you know, he had developments up where he was a partner in 1987, when people all say, oh, no, we'll do a rental fallback. I'll say there was no one to rent. New York wasn't like that.
But what
you know?
Will said, hey, that's 1987. Now there are people. People are coming to the city. People are going there. I think that the real question comes in is how much can you rent certain of these things?
Well,
I mean,
to me, there's two things that are controlling it. One, which we have, which is an act of legislation, is this tax abatement program. How, as a residential developer, yes, I'm looking into mixed use and repositioning rental properties under the J51, you know, tax program. But how that's going to affect me, right? And that has nothing to do necessarily with the market, but that has to do with legislation. Regarding the market in itself, you know, I'm not going to stand here and give you a theory as to what I think the future holds. I do see that it's leveling off, and like you said, we haven't been around that long. So I'm going to continue to use the bank's model as to how I should underwrite the deal, and if the deal works, then move forward. But I don't have necessarily a theory. I haven't done it for 40 years. I can look back on it.
Please,
and say
I'm just trying. Jason, how does Heinz, in the big perspective, I mean, you have a lot of developments over here. How do they look at the market, and how do they direct you, and how do you direct your bosses and other people in this marketplace?
I think I heard I direct my bosses, which isn't quite the case.
You know,
but
let me tell you, I as Will knows, I work with younger people, and I love, and I get good thoughts from my younger people, so I do.
Well, I guess the way I think about it is that to date, the shift has been entirely capital markets driven. And until we see, I think this is going to be a critical spring for us, until we see the capital markets affect the fundamentals of our business, you know, supply. Obviously, we think it is affecting supply right now because there's less that's going to get built, but really from the demand side, until it affects the office demand and the condo velocity, we think it's going to be a relatively short-lived phenomenon.
Boy, I mean, you know,
that could change. Excuse me, that could change if this spring, you know, the bottom falls out from the residential market in New York. 2 weeks ago,
sitting in the same seats as you are, Larry Silverstein, the alternative optimist, when I asked him about how the market is in 2008, said to me, this is the worst capital dislocation he has seen in his entire career. And I said, Larry, in your entire career? He said, the worst. So I hope you're right. But all I see today is banks saying it's easier to cover my rear by not lending than to lend. It's much easier. Some banks, some of the German banks, even some of the domestic banks, rather sit. I said, what do you do? He says, I make a phone call. I call a couple of my broker friends. I call a couple of developers. I go to lunch. I am not making a decision. When 4 weeks ago, a major German bank walked away from $1.7 million of letters of intent and screwing people, it's not getting easier. Will. Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm actually curious for Eli's opinion on something, because there's something that I can't figure out about the banks. It's sort of generally agreed that we're in this mess because all the bankers were saying yes because they couldn't afford to be the guys seen as not saying yes because they would have lost their jobs. Now, all of the bankers are saying no because you can't be the one guy saying yes. It would seem that the lesson should have been, don't be the guy who's constrained by appearances, and lend or don't lend based on the merits of the transaction. But it feels like that lesson's been lost here because everyone's more concerned with not getting fired than doing a good job.
So pose the question to Eli.
So that's my question to Eli.
It's sort of a game of musical chairs, and the sense was in let's say the 2003 to 2007 world, there was always somebody who could buy that debt. And now that there's not someone you could pass the debt along to, a buyer of the debt, the bank can't renew its capital source. And if the bank, as I said before, if the banks are limited to the capital they have, then obviously they're going to be extremely choosy in deals, and they should. They're going to be holding.
Perhaps I can give it in a 30-second explanation. A number of years ago, I had Rob Verone, a friend from Wachovia, and I said to him, Your boss, Bill Green, I heard him speak at a symposium, and they said, what do you think interest rates are going to be in 6 months? He said, that's not my responsibility. He says, I only worry what it's going to be in 90 days because all I am is to sell the paper. So I said, basically, you're a bookmaker. He said, you're damn right. I'm not here taking a risk. I get rid of this.
Right. Playing from securitization.
And what happened was, the paper is there now, and they can't get rid of it. So these banks are sitting there. The investment banks have nothing. They can't do anything. There's something called the CMBS market that's come to an end, and it's really difficult. Even for a big company where I am, people say, oh, you want to do that rental deal in Manhattan? 35% equity. Right. I mean, we don't mind doing it because we have the equity, and there's plenty, as you said, Jason, there's a lot of equity out there. The question is, where do you want to put your dollars? And people, I think it's a good comment, like you said, Will. I don't want to be the last guy thinking. Was I smart in building that condo? Was I smart in building that office building? I mean, look, Jason, the MoMA building's going to be successful. It's the right location. It's a great thing. It serves everything. It's going to be there. But it's easier to say, I'll wait a little while longer than to go into it. And I think, Will, you're seeing it, the activity is down.
Certainly. I think the activity is softer, but I think for the right transactions, there's still an audience. I mean, our phone rings all day long with people saying, help me find some distressed assets to buy.
Right.
You know what? That's the term. Everybody says, find me the distressed asset. Find me the distressed debt. I mean, that's the key. But there's not, the distress isn't there yet.
Right.
I think
I think a word that, you hit on, which Larry Silverstein said, was dislocation. And I think the dislocation is with bid-ask. Where you speak about land in Brooklyn with the 421A. Sellers have a value in mind, and the bid and ask might be meeting up. In the debt markets, the bid and the ask might not be winning up. And so what sort of will end this dislocation? Time. I think people's realizations, as you were saying, you're looking at deals where you're thinking about 35% equity and you're sort of not sure, but maybe you go ahead in a few months as that 35% equity becomes a reality, and that becomes the new market. And so as time and this shock of the credit crunch settles in, maybe the bid-ask starts to tighten up a little bit, and this dislocation.
It certainly already is, though. I mean, if I'm on the street now creating deals, you see it's more when you're sitting down to negotiate. It's a partnership because the seller has to understand what I can get today. These are the constraints on me. Do you ever, so if you ever want to realize these dollars, you have to work with me. Instead of it used to be, this is my number. And then you would leave 2 minutes later, and the next person was behind you saying, you know what, I'm going to take the risk. Let's do it. Now it's, I have this constraint, this constraint, this constraint. I'm a credible developer who can actually get financing. So,
you put 4 titans together, 4 bright guys. I mean, by the time, I hope that, his hair doesn't turn gray. I know he'll never turn gray. But I'd like to thank Eric Brody, Jason Alderman, Will Silverman, and last but not least, Eli Weiss for being here. See you next week.
Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, SJP Properties, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, Greenberg Traurig, Allied Partners. Additional funding is provided by grants from Arbor Realty Trust and Terry's Investment Partners, Athena Group, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Herbert J. Sims and Company, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Helmsley Spear, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Metal Products, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, Meriden Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Moynihan Organization, MUSS Development, PALIN Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Sheldrake Organization, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, Triangle Services, WITKOFF Group, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.